Hey everybody, Eric Grenier, and welcome to this special episode of the Writ Podcast, the 132nd episode. I'm joined today by Richard Zussman of Global News. This is actually the second time we've spoken today. We recorded a podcast about BC politics this morning. Turned out to be a bad idea because everything changed today. Richard, thanks for doing this. Thanks for doing this again. Why don't you tell us what happened today?
Well, I was supposed to be on vacation in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, but in political reporting, Eric, as you know, never take a vacation, especially in an election year. So Kevin Falcon, still the BC United leader, announced that he was not going to run in the next election, that he was not going to allow anyone to run under the BC United banner, and is encouraging all of his supporters to vote Conservative. He is encouraging some of his candidates to tell the Conservatives they are interested in running, and the Conservatives are going to do a re-vetting process and potentially take on some of these candidates and have a unified force against David Eby and the NDP come election day on October 19th.
They don't have a lot of time to do this. The writ drops, on the 19th of September? It is August 28th when we're recording this today. This seems like really, really late in the game to make such a huge change.
September 21st is writ. October 19th is election day. We are incredibly close to that. And we have had these conversations, Eric, for months. The last time I was on the podcast, they were in the midst of these conversations. And when you look at polls, you could see what was happening. The BC Conservatives and the BC NDP were solidifying 1 and 2, with the NDP in first, the Conservatives in second in most polls. And BC United was way back, between anywhere from 9% to 11 or 12%. But Kevin Falcon was insistent, time and time again, that when we got into that 28-day campaign cycle, he was going to be able to convince Conservative voters that he was the best option to form Premier, that he had the experience in cabinet, that he had the organization, and most importantly, he had the more mainstream viewpoints. There are a lot of problematic Conservative candidates, but Falcon ultimately made the decision today that wasn't the case, that there was no hope for BC United. It is so crazy to me, Eric. Just a few weeks ago, they fired their campaign team, hired a new campaign team. They found new candidates, some of them going on leaves from jobs to take on this opportunity. Falcon did this without consulting with his caucus, without consulting with his staff, unilaterally made this decision, and it's leaving a significant mess. You know, there is a reputation out here that anything can happen in BC politics, and this is as wild as I've ever seen it. That so close to an election, one party basically just concedes, and he's walking away from a dynasty. The BC Liberals represented government for 16 years in this province. They still have a significant infrastructure, and that dynasty is now over. The party of Gordon Campbell, the party of Christy Clark, the party of Andrew Wilkinson, and then Kevin Falcon, even though it's a name change, they're now over. It's gone. It's over.
It's incredible. I was looking at it. Since 1996, this party has only once lost the popular vote, and that was in 2020. And now it's a party that seemingly is not going to exist. You said it is a mess. It sounds like a huge mess, the fact that it doesn't seem to have been run by anybody beyond Kevin Falcon and I suppose maybe some of the people around him. Is he actually able to do this?
He is. That's my understanding. It's incredible. Yesterday, he spent time with reporters doing profile pieces. Who is Kevin Falcon, the BC United leader? I'm not sure he woke up on Tuesday morning knowing he was going to do this. By 9 o'clock at night, he had made the decision. On Wednesday, I spoke to many caucus members of BC United. I broke the news to them for a lot of them. They had no idea that this was happening, and they had no insight into why it's happening. There are candidates who are still confused about whether they're the ones that should say, I want to run. There are 93 seats in this province, Eric. The Conservatives have nominated more than 82 candidates. So either they are going to get rid of some of these candidates who have had controversial viewpoints in the past, or the Conservatives deem as problematic, replace them with some of these United candidates, or these United candidates are going to be offered up the handful of seats that are left that are mainly in seats the NDP should win. So these are people who have dedicated time, left their work, put in resources, knocked on doors, You see some of the social media posts. James Mitchell in North Vancouver, Jamie Stein in Vancouver Langara. These are candidates who have been knocking doors every night. They're talking about relating to these voters. And now it's gone. There's no more of this. And you ask the question, can he do this? He controls the party. He's the party leader. But caucus can do a number of things. I found out on Wednesday that he held a caucus meeting minutes before the event was going to take place. The news was already out there. And one of the caucus members said to him, Kevin, resign as leader of BC United. Allow us to pick an interim leader. Allow us to run candidates. He refused to resign. He hung up the phone and left to the press conference. So he does have the power here to, in essence, decide who runs, to freeze those candidates. Caucus can do what they want, and they may attempt to pull some tools to remove Kevin Falcon as caucus leader, but as party leader, that's going to be much more complicated. And you've described it. We are running out of time, and that could be one of the issues, obviously, around whether this is even possible.
I'm just flabbergasted by it. I really don't know what to say after this kind of thing. It's just something you don't see happening in politics. You see this kind of thing happening after an election defeat. You don't see it often ahead of an election that I guess they were expecting to go down to defeat. So these BCU candidates, the ones that really aren't going to be able to replace conservatives because maybe, the Conservative Party likes the people they already have in some of these places. They're not just going to do politics? That's just it for them?
So you think about someone like Shirley Bond. Shirley Bond is an institution in this province. One of the most successful politicians BC has ever seen. Represents the riding of Prince George Valemount. This is, in essence, the end of the line for her. She is a diehard BC Liberal, BC United supporter. I can't imagine a situation where she puts up her hand and says, I want to run for the Conservatives. And the Conservatives were born out of protest towards the BC Liberals, BC United. They're not going to open their arms and say, Shirley Bond, sure, come join us. There are candidates like that who will not have a seat at this table. And does her career end because of a Kevin Falcon press conference? Because of a backroom deal? That's a pretty crummy way to go for someone who has given so much to the province. There are others that may decide to run potentially as independents. We'll see what happens with that mechanism around getting Falcon out as leader, because they're going to try it now, but it's unclear whether there's going to be an opportunity there. So do they put their hands up and say, fine, I'll run as an independent and attempt that route? Those are really the only options. You described never seen this before. I've never seen it either. And knowing the mechanisms it's still so early, right, to understand the power that you have. I think, most of the viewers, listeners, understand politics and will understand that, political parties are an apparatus or an organization with their own constitution and their own rules. But we're now entering the realm of public perception, right? The voters want to understand here, where is this party? And I've also looked at some really interesting polling around second choices. Not necessarily will BC United voters all go Conservative. There are a lot of them who are from the Liberal wing of that former BC Liberal Party, who were the diehard United people who never wanted to vote NDP but never would go Conservative. Where do they go now? Maybe they end up voting NDP. The latest poll I saw showed about 30% of BC United supporters would support the NDP as their second vote. That could be enough for David Eby here. But now, mano a mano, head to head, David Eby versus John Rustad with no fear in some ways of that vote splitting, other than that idea of, where do these more centrist former BC liberal voters now go?
Yeah, because I asked David Coletto from Abacus. He had recently done a poll, and he had found that roughly it was about 46% of BC United voters said they would vote for the federal Liberals, and 32 would vote for the federal Conservatives. So whoever's left in the party might be a little bit more likely to go to the NDP than to the Conservatives. So is this going to help the Conservatives in the election? Do they feel like this is going to be what puts them over the top?
Yes. And they feel like this is their ability now not to split the vote. I think the reality for a lot of people was with BC United and BC Conservatives both on the ballot, the Conservative path to victory was extremely difficult. Now, without the United there, They still have to knock off an incumbent, but we know there are these global pressures on incumbents. They are struggling all around the world around issues like cost of living, and in this province, healthcare and public safety. There is a sentiment from change. But we're going to hear a lot of messaging from David Eby saying that John Rustad is just the same old BC Liberals. He is the same old Conservatives that you don't like in this province. That's going to be some of the messaging here. Sorry about the camera work.
Hey, no, I mean, like I said, this was a bit of an emergency podcast. Some things are gonna. I mean, that's not the weirdest thing that's happened today in British Columbia. That's for sure.
No,
so
I'm in the rain. I'm in the rain capital of British Columbia, and I'm doing this in the rain for you, Eric. And I've got a slippy spot on the windowsill, but I think we should be okay.
All right. Well, we appreciate it. So, are there going to be any Conservatives who aren't going to like this move?
Yes, there will be a lot of Conservatives who don't like this move, and to that point we were talking about earlier, this was a protest movement here. People did not like what had happened with the BC Liberals. They didn't like that John Rustad was thrown out of the BC Liberals. They didn't like a lot of what Kevin Falcon stood for, that he was part of this old guard. They did not like the Liberal part of BC United, and they are going to be angry. There is going to be some frustration, and some of those candidates are going to be very worried that they're the ones that are going to be swapped out here. When they were looking at opportunity to become an MLA, they had dedicated their time as well to run for the Conservatives. So there will be part of this movement here that is discouraged by what they've seen and will not be happy with what is unfolding. The organization now sees a clear path to victory, but there'll be a lot of Conservatives who disagree a lot with what Kevin Falcon has stood for and what BC United has stood for.
So does the Conservatives just replace the BC Liberals in terms of the map, in terms of the voters? Is the path now for the BC Conservatives just exactly what it had been for Christy Clark and Gordon Campbell before?
This is the assumption, that we are now looking in essence at a 2017 election map when the BC Liberals won 43, the NDP won 41, and the Greens won 3. And the swing ridings that we saw in that election will largely be the swing ridings now. So the Conservatives will have a significant advantage in many parts of northern British Columbia. So they will target, through the Peace region, into Prince George, down into Kamloops and Kelowna. Some of those key areas to watch for will be the NDP held seats in those regions. So there are 2 in the Okanagan, 1 in Vernon, and 1 down south, boundary Similkameen. So in the Similkameen Valley going into Soyuz and Oliver, those are NDP seats. David Eby is going to do what he can to hold on to those seats. They were beneficiaries of a NDP movement with Horgan in 2020. With a unified right, it's going to be harder in those ridings. You also need to look in those areas right around Metro Vancouver where this election is decided. So look at those ridings in Chilliwack and Abbotsford, Langley. As that blue wave comes in east to west, then you start having this conversation about whether they can form government or not. So you pick up those seats in the Langley. They need to pick up some in Surrey. The Conservatives do. They also have to have some success in other places in Metro Vancouver. Is that a few ridings in Vancouver? Is that in Richmond? The NDP had a huge breakthrough in Richmond last election. First time they'd won there in decades. Could they potentially pull back those seats, the Conservatives, from the NDP? What's so incredible to me, Eric, is this is a party that hasn't won a seat in this province since 1978. Hasn't formed government since the 40s. Yes, they've had some floor crossers, but they've never won. The first Conservative that wins on election night this year will be the first one to win in nearly 50 years. And to then talk about them winning 47 of these to form government is a transition point like we've never seen. The area where they think they can pick up that hasn't been particularly generous in the past to BC Liberals is on Vancouver Island. There are 3 or 4 seats. A few of those have been Liberal in the past, Courtney Comox, and the Parksville riding that's now been broken up. There's a big eye on those now from the Conservatives, including all the way up in North Island. So those are places Conservatives have had some success provincially, some success federally, and it's going to be a spot where they're going to target now. And that's the electoral map you start building. Those are the swings that I'll be looking at as we work towards the election to build up that possibility of a Conservative majority.
Does the NDP strategy have to change? Were they prepared just to run against John Rustad, or were were they expecting to just ignore BCU? Does this change anything from a strategic point of view for the New Democrats?
From New Democrats I spoke to today, it doesn't. They had already shifted. You could have heard the language from David Eby over the last 2 months. He is targeting towards John Rustad. And this almost solidifies it, that this is just the BC Liberals renamed. And John Rustad had an opportunity as the Conservatives to carve out something different. The NDP will not give them that opportunity anymore. They will say, this is just the BC Liberals that, made you pay for healthcare, that made you pay the tolls, that had insurance rates that were sky high just for driving your car. Those are the things you didn't like. That you had to, pay a huge amount of money for childcare and wait in line for years. In many cases, families having to put their name on a waiting list even before a child was conceived. These are the sort of issues you're going to hear time and time again, at the same time bringing up this idea that, John Rustad has questions around the impacts of man-made climate change. Rustad will be forced to explain that policy, that there are candidates and even leadership within that party who are transphobic. Again, there's going to be an opportunity for Rustad to explain these policies. What will they do to protect trans kids in this province? There'll be a debate around free contraceptives. That's been an incredibly popular policy from the NDP. BC led the way on that policy in this country. Do the Conservatives say that they're going to scale back free contraceptives? We don't know. We haven't really seen much of a map. The only policy piece we saw from the Conservatives was on healthcare, and the focus is on private healthcare delivery. That's another big sticking point, private versus public healthcare debate. So I just don't know how all of this will break down, but I know that the NDP has a plan for some ads that will run soon that will be highlighting some of these issues I raised.
It means that BC is moving actually a little bit faster than we thought we would. Thought it would at least be a few more weeks into an orange-blue fight like we see in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Does this make things easier for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives to pick a side? Because it seemed like there was some people on both within BCU and some people supporting the BC Conservatives.
It's going to be really interesting. And I don't know for sure, but my gut is telling me that Pierre Poilievre may have gotten involved here. And that there may have been a conversation from the federal arm of the party saying to Kevin Falcon, we wanted to stay out of this, but we can't stay out of this anymore. And if you don't get out of the way, we will run you over. I don't know that for sure. It's just my gut. It's a sense of something that could have changed here because Kevin Falcon's messaging for the last few months was always the same. I am the one that's better able to serve the province. These are a bunch of crazies, a bunch of conspiracy theorists. These aren't people that can govern. These are fringe candidates. This was the words out of Kevin Falcon's mouth to describe the people that he has now endorsed. So something must have pushed him. And I think one of those things that could have pushed him are the federal Conservatives, who would have said, we need this. We need to pick a side, and we're going to pick the other guy. And that would have been problematic for Mike DeYoung, who's a BC United MLA, who's running for the Conservatives, or hoping to, hasn't won the nomination yet. Dan Ashton, BC United MLA, hoping to run for the Conservatives. Ellis Ross, BC MLA, in a riding right near here, representing Kitimat and Terrace, who is running for the Conservative federal election. It was going to get complicated. And I think now things have been simplified. And we will see federal Conservatives show up in droves in this province to help in that blue versus orange fight. Because Pierre Poilievre wants to show strength leading up to that federal election, and provincial elections are an opportunity to test the climate of the electorate. And if he and his team can help the Conservatives here, it shows well as they try to pass that message on federally.
If they're now united, does this mean that now David Eby is the one with the delicate balance with Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau? And because he needs a lot of those Liberal voters.
Yeah, he needs, and that's always been the case, that he needs those Liberal voters. The struggle is how many Liberal voters are left. We've seen polls go down, but Justin Trudeau did incredibly well here in the last federal election. And those are the voters that David Eby is attempting to tap into. Those may also be the swing voters in suburban Vancouver. John Aldag is a good example here. He is the NDP candidate in Langley, Abbotsford. He was an MP that won one of those really vital Liberal Conservative flip seats in suburban Metro Vancouver. Yes, tides have changed. People are frustrated with cost of living, frustrated with the Prime Minister. Some of that reflects on the Premier as well. But David Eby has spent a lot of time recently attacking Justin Trudeau in Ottawa for a lack of financial support for BC projects. He's raised the issue again of payments across the province to different provinces, and that BC sends money through equalization directly to Ontario. And one thing British Columbians are united on is their distaste towards Ontario, especially when it comes to money. So this is one of those things where it's going to be curious, and whether we do see some federal Liberals get more engaged in this campaign. Historically, it's been a weird balance here. You've seen a lot of really prominent federal Liberal organizers also work for the BC Liberals, for BC United. They won't feel at home with these Conservatives. So do they work for the NDP? But they won't feel home there either, right? These organizers, because they won't feel comfortable with Jagmeet Singh and his team. So you have these people who are lost at sea a little bit, and we'll find out where they dock themselves when it comes to election.
All right, I want to finish on this because we haven't mentioned them. The question for me going into the election campaign was whether there was going to be only two parties left, whether the Greens and BCU might get wiped out. At least now it's just about whether the BC Greens are going to get wiped out or not. They're going to be in some trouble in this campaign. What are you kind of going to be watching for them?
So this is going to be fascinating because the best case scenario is 2017. They win a few seats, hold the balance of power, and then make a decision about who they're going to support. Sonia Furstenau sent out a statement basically saying that Falcon is laughing in the face of democracy here. But I also wonder how Green voters look at their options. If they are truly concerned about the climate, do they find home with John Rustad? One of the fascinating parts about this, Eric, has been the role of Andrew Weaver, the former Green Party leader, because he's told me that he actually believes John Rustad's climate plan is the same as John Horgan's. I haven't seen that on paper. I don't fully understand what that means, but I wonder how Rustad articulates a climate vision. And if he isn't able to appease environmentalists, do they say, do you know what? The Greens are a protest vote. We're going to go for the NDP because we're concerned about the environment just like the NDP is concerned about the environment. That's one potential factor. It's going to be interesting. The Greens are focusing in. Sonia Furstenau is now running in Victoria in a seat that has historically been held by the NDP, but the Conservatives have a very good candidate there in Tim Thielman. So you wonder what splits may happen in that riding. He's backed by Stephen Andrew, who finished second in the mayoral race. It's going to be really intriguing to see what happens there. And then in the old riding that Furstenau held, it's been split up in all sorts of weird ways. She lives in one of the areas that got split off to side with Soup, which has historically been an NDP stronghold. And the other part of Cowichan Valley, Duncan, got carved out and added another area. So it's going to be really interesting what's at play here in terms of those seats. And there's a new riding, Victoria, or Nanaimo-Lanceville, that again, a former BC NDP MLA, Gwen O'Mahony, is running for the Conservatives. And a federal Liberal, George Anderson, is running for the NDP. So it's going to be really interesting to see the dynamic there because that's another one the Conservatives have their eye on.
So when we spoke earlier today, I closed by asking you what to expect between now and the writ drop. Now I'm just going to ask you, what do you expect? What are you looking for between now and Monday? And
because you're never going to air it, I said, I expect Kevin Falcon's going to quit in a few hours.
It was an amazing prediction. I was really impressed.
I don't know. What am I going to expect? So what we did talk about was the consolidation of the right. And did I expect this to happen? No. But I expected that we'd see some sort of solidification of the right. That's now over. So what do I expect? Can David Eby brand these Conservatives before they can brand themselves? Because right now, many British Columbians don't know what a BC Conservative is. They know what a federal Conservative is. They know who Pierre Poilievre is, but they don't know who John Rustad is. So can David Eby frame John Rustad before he can frame himself? And I also wonder what job Kevin Falcon's going to get. That's for another day. So there's just so much that can happen. And that idea that we're seeing globally around incumbents is going to make this a challenging road for David Eby and one of the most unlikely political stories that we will see in this province's history.
No, it's just been an incredible day, and you've been incredible to do this with me twice, and we only get to do the second time that we're going to put up for the public. The first one was really good, everybody. I tell you, Richard's great. So really appreciate you taking this time off on your vacation, though I think a lot of things made you get away from your vacation today. But Richard, looking forward to chatting again when this campaign gets going, because who knows what's going to happen between now and then.
I was away when Christy Clark quit from the BC Liberals. I had COVID when John Horgan quit as Premier. And I was away when Kevin Falcon quit. I don't go away very often, Eric, but I'll ward all politicians in British Columbia when I'm going away, because that may be the moment that it's over for them.
Yeah, time to check your vacation with BC's leaders. Richard, thanks so much. Really appreciate it today.
Yeah, my pleasure as always, Eric. Thanks for having me.